Hello everyone, my name is Dean and welcome back to the 20 and 20 challenge. This is week 5 part 2 where we are working on a React API Ruby on Rails application. So I guess that wasn't right. The Ruby on Rails portion is the API and React is the front end that's using it. So in part 1 we created the Ruby on Rails API and we started serving out some to-do list items, and each item has a task of type string or text, I think. And then we created a separate React application that is going to be like using this API. So from inside this React application, we're going to be making get and post requests, and we're going to cover both of those today. And we're going to say, I want to put a to-do list item into the database, or I want to get all of the items, or once I put the item into the database, I need to get it back so that I can see what your version of events is so that I can use it. And we're going to try and do this all in the don't repeat yourself kind of way so that we're not duplicating code. Now that's going to mean we're going to be creating a couple extra files as opposed to just one big file that has 20 different functions in it. But when you need to edit or change something, like in this case, we're going to be creating to-do items. But when we go to, actually post the items to the database, it's a lot easier to do that because we already have this to-do item that we created in the first place for the get request that we can just reuse. So we just say, make a new to-do item and you're done. Instead of having to create a function that does the same thing and creates another LI for like the list items, we sort of do it in a much better way. And it's something that you would, you can take pride in when you're done because if anyone ever looks at this code, it might not be the most impressive project, but they'll look at it and they'll say, well, for what the project is, the code looks pretty good. So at least we have that going for us as of, part 2. I'm sure by the time we get to like part 5, it's going to be a raging dumpster fire because that's what happens when you hack over the course of a week. But for right now, it's something that should give you guys some value. So let's go ahead and let's jump into the get requests and the post requests, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, so continuing where we left off last time, this is what the server looks like right now. You can see I've been doing a little bit of testing here, so I have 3 extra to-do items in my list. If you don't have these, don't worry about it. They're really not going to be important, and by the time you want to create more, we'll have the form set up so you can do that from your React application. But if we take a look at the React application, where we left off, it was just a lot of static stuff on the page, so it was just a title, with some text that said the form should be here, and the to-do list right here. So what we're going to do today, and I have to take a look at what I have so that I know I'm doing this in the right order, because I try to leave all of these projects with like a working version of the code by the time the video's over. So let's try and get the to-do items, and maybe we'll put them into a separate to-do item JS file. So that seems like a good enough place to start. So let's go ahead and let's move over to below our state. So we create the state right here with just an empty items array. And then what we want to do is like right here, say something like after we've created the state, get the items from the API. Now with React, you don't necessarily have to do this in the constructor. What you can do instead is you can, inside of something called component did mount, and you can see right here, called immediately after a component is mounted. Setting state here will trigger re-rendering. So like after the initial setup and the component gets mounted, this is the next thing that gets called. So if you're used to Unity, for example, it's like the difference between your, your awake method and your start method. So it's like this is your awake and this is your start. So it just executes slightly after it, but it's still one of the first things that runs. And now that I'm thinking about it, the chances of overlap here between a Rails developer and a Unity developer are probably few and far between. But inside of here, let's do this items from the API thing. And just to keep things cleaner, let's create a function. We'll call it like get tasks, and we'll just call this in here. And we need to have a context right here. So we're going to say this dot, just to make sure that it knows which function we're trying to use. So let's go ahead and let's define this get tasks function. And for this, last time we did like a var x http is equal to new XML HTTP request. And we did all of that stuff. This time we're just going to be using a fetch request. So we're going to say fetch, and then we're going to pass in the API URL. And it looks like right here, I talked about this in one of the on-screen text things last time, but I accidentally set this to be HTTPS localhost 3001. So let's come up here and let's just change this to HTTP. And then after the fetch, we then have to do a .then. And we'll move this to the next line. So we say fetch from this URL, then take the response and call response.json. And then after you do that, so we'll say .then again, we're then given some response items, and we want these response items to be set to the items we have in our state up here. So we get the response items, and then we call this .setState, and then inside of this, we want to say items is response items. So assuming we did all this correctly, we should be good to put a semicolon right there, and this should finish off this get tasks function. And I guess we could test this by saying console.log. Oh, I guess we're not saving this to a variable. We could do something like console.log this.state.items maybe. And let's see what happens here. I'm sort of winging this part, so we'll see what looks like our array is actually 0 here. So this might be too soon. So maybe we'll move this down to the render because it should trigger a re-render. And then, yeah, so now we're getting all 4 of our items, and we had 4 over here. So if I take a look at these, you can see here that we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and it's all 4 of the items are now being sent to this application. So that's good. Let's go ahead and let's see if we can put these into the actual to-do list right here. So for this, what we can do, or what we could do, inside of our UL, we could do something like, let me just remove these. We'll say UL with an ID equal to to-do list. And then inside of this, we can say this.state. And I'm going to full screen this so you can see what I'm doing here. We'll do this.state.items, and then we're going to call the map function. And we'll pass in the item, and we'll say for the item, we want to inside of here say I guess we could do like an li, and we'll give this a key equal to item.id and a item. Oops, I guess we don't need that. And then in here we can just say item.task, I believe. And this should hopefully work how I'm expecting it to, but you never really know. It's sort of the problem with winging these things. Yeah, so here we're getting the task sent to the page by calling, now this li key, this is just every React component is going to require its own unique key. And all I'm doing here is just saying set the key to be equal to the item's ID, because we know that our Rails application isn't going to give us 2 items that have a duplicate ID. So you were probably safe there. And then we call item.task to get the task. So if I don't have it in my console anymore, but let me just add in the console.log again. So say console.log this.state.items. So if we take a look at this, you can see when the item comes in, it gives us an ID. So we could also call ID in here. So if you wanted to, you could do something like item.id colon, and then whatever this item is right here, and that'll give you that. You can also use like the created at or the updated at if you wanted to, because those are also being passed to us. But one thing I don't like about this, what we're doing here, is I don't like having this just, li sitting here. I'd much prefer to do something like to do item with a key equal to item.id and an item equal to item. So we would have like a React component that we could use here where we pass in the actual item and we just set the key like this. That's how I would prefer to do this. So let's go ahead and let's see if we can just do this real quick. And I seem to be having an error here with my parentheses. Oh, gotcha. There we go. I forgot to get rid of the old li. So if we do this, we now need to come into our to-do list folder and create a new file, and we'll call this ToDoItem.js. And for our to-do item, this is going to be really simple. We just need to say import React from React. We're not importing component this time, because this time we're just going to do a export default function ToDoItem, and we'll just pass in the props. So unlike over here where we had a class that we were using that extended component, this time we're just using a function, and we're just going to say, for now, let's do a li, and we'll return props.item.task. So we grab the item through this props, and we're passing in the prop right here with the item equals item. And then we're just displaying the task from that item. So in theory, if I remember to import this, so if I come up here and I say import ToDoItem from /ToDoItem, and I save this, we now have the exact same functionality as we did before, but now we're using this ToDoItem React component instead. So that gets us our to-do items in a bit more of a readable form. The next thing we can do is we can add in the actual form itself. So for this, we'll come into our ToDoForm.js, because we have to do a little bit of housekeeping in here. And by housekeeping, I mean we have to do like everything that the form needs to do. So we'll start in the state. So we call super with the props, and then in the state, we want to say the API URL is equal to props.api URL. We need the task to just be the empty string for now, and that's about it. We'll then create a, well, I guess we'll do the handlers in a second. So let's come down to our render. So what we need to do for right now, I guess we can, I'll try to leave off some of this styling so we don't focus too heavily on that. We can start with a form tag, and then we'll just inside of here do some of the magic. So we'll do the form tag, and then we have like the default form stuff that we have to deal with, and then we also have like a text field for the task, right? And then after the task, we then have a submit button, right? Based on how we created the JavaScript form, at least. So if we're doing something similar, what we can do is we could say like form, and then inside of this form, we'll say on submit is equal to this.handle submit, and we need to actually create this handler. And then we'll also give this form an ID equal to ToDoForm, and then we'll give it an autocomplete equal to off. So that should give us the basic functionality we would expect there. And then we want a text field. And for this, what we can do is we can use, if I come up to the top here, I think the import is, let's say import text field from, and this is at material -UI/core/text field. And this will give us the material text field. So we can just grab this real quick, come down here, and we can say this should be a text field. Now we don't need this second tag right here, so we'll just close it like this. But we do need to give this some options. So the first thing we're going to do, we'll give this an ID equal to task input. We'll then give this a label equal to task name. A variant equal to outlined, a type equal to text, and a name equal to do task. And then we just need a on change, where we set this .handle task change. So for a lot of this stuff, if I just minimize this real quick, you can go over to the Material UI React text area, and not text area, text field. TextField. So if you search for that, you can find the TextField React component page. And then when you come in here, you should see, assuming my internet's still working. Okay, that was weird. You should see some examples of like snippets that you can use. So here you can see there's the hello world pre-filled. There's some disabled ones, some read-only, some helper text. And you can just sort of pick which one you want. And then when you grab one of these code snippets, so I'll just grab like this one right here. You can hit show source, and you can see here some of the default examples that they give you. So you can just sort of pick and choose which ones you need if you're using material for stuff like this. So that's sort of where I found out what like the variant needs to be, or like the label stuff, like the basic format for how this text field works. I found it off of both this components page, and also at the very bottom, there's always an API page. And you can just go to like the API and you can say, okay, for this specific text field, what are some of the configurations? So like, here's all the props you can pass it. So that's sort of how you work with this documentation. But okay, the next thing we need to do after we have this text field is create a button for submitting. So for this, we need to import button from, and this is probably going to be at material UI /core/button. And it looks like that was correct. So this will let us import this button, and then below the text field, we'll just say create a button with a variant equal to contained. It'll have a color equal to primary, and it'll have a type equal to submit. And then for this one, we'll just say submit. Or you could even do something like add task right here. So we'll save all this, and we'll come over to our React app, and you can see here we have like our task field and our add task. So maybe we should change this from task name to just be like task description maybe. That way it's a bit more obvious what you're adding here. And then we can say like do the thing, and we can hit submit. And you can see here that nothing happens. Our API, which I actually have open down here, and if I enter down, you can see if I hit add task, the only thing that happens here is the initial GET request that fires when you load the page, because we're grabbing these tasks again. We're not actually doing the post request yet, because we haven't created these event handlers. So we don't have this handle submit, and we also don't have this handle task change. So we need to do those real quick. So let's start with this handle submit. So the first thing we need to do is we need to bind this. So inside of our constructor, we want to say this.handle submit is equal to this.handle submit dot bind this. And then the second thing we have to do is say this.handle task change is equal to this.handle task change dot bind this. So now we can actually create these two functions. So let's start with the handle submit. So we'll say handle submit. And in here, this is going to take in an event. And the first thing we're going to do is say event.prevent default. And then after we do that, we then say, we then need to actually do the form submission. So last time we did an event prevent default to stop ourselves from going to the actual API page when we hit submit. So before we would hit submit, it would take us literally to like /todos/ I'll type 1 to go to hello world. So we'd create hello world, and then it would redirect us to this URL. So like from here, you'd hit add task, and then it would just pop you over to that URL. So that's obviously not ideal. So the first thing we're doing here is we're going to do prevent default, and then we're going to do a this.form submit call where we are passing in the event.target to get the form data. So we do need to actually create this form submit function as well. So if we come below the handle submit, we'll say form submit, and we'll submit the form data. Now, because we're doing this as an asynchronous request, we actually can start off by declaring this as an async function. And now we can do a var data equals new form, and let me just full screen this, new form data, and we'll pass in the input form data from right here. So say pass in the form data. We can now say var response is equal to, actually, I don't think I use this. So we can just say await fetch this.state.api URL. Because we have up here, we pass in the API URL into the state, so we're just using that to grab it. And fetch takes the target URL, and then you have to pass in the actual data for your your request information. So what we do here is we open up some braces, and in here we can create like our method, which will be a post. Oops, a post. We have a mode, which is going to be CORS, and we can put the body to be the data. So once we've done that, we can then call .then again, and we can say, response is response.json, and then we can call a .then right here. Oops, a .then, and say response is this.props. Oh, and I haven't even created this yet. We want to call this .props.update to-do list and pass in the response. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, format it to JSON, and then we want to go to the parent of the form. So we want to go to the to-do list, and in the to-do list, we want to say update the list of items we have here. So we come into our app, we create a new task. We hit add task, it pushes it to the database, and then the database sends us back what we just added. We then grab what we just added and we append it to the list. That's sort of how we want this to work. Now, because we're doing this inside of this separate component here, we need some way to take this information and send it back to the to-do list. So for this, I created this little function here, which we're passing in via the props, where we can sort of do a callback to the to-do list. So inside of our to-do list, we create this update to-do list function. So I guess right below this get tasks, we'll say update to-do list, and this will take in an item. And then we can say, let items, or let underscore items equal this dot state dot items. You can then do underscore items dot unshift, and you can add this item to the beginning. And then you can say this dot set state, and then you'll say items is this new temporary items. So hopefully by breaking this up into 3 lines here, it's a bit clearer what we're doing. So we're grabbing the items in our state and we're adding this item to, unshift adds to the beginning of the array. So if you have something like, an array of 1, 2, 3, and you do, let's say this is temp array is equal to this. If you then do temp array dot unshift and you unshift in 13, you'll then have temp array equal to 13, 1, 2, 3. So we grab it, we unshift, and then we set the state, which causes this to render again, which is different from how we did it before, because I think last time we did something like document dot find by ID, find element by ID, and then we grabbed the to-do list, and then we said dot insert adjacent HTML, and then we said after begin, because that's after the div begins. So this is the div, and then after it begins, we then said insert adjacent HTML, and we inserted the item there, but it was the item as this same item here. So we'd have to do something like to-do item with a key equal to item.key or item.id and an item equal to item. So instead of doing all of this, which it already looks just horrendously messy, right? So if I even change this to look correct, so insert adjacent, insert adjacent HTML maybe. And then this is find element by ID. So instead of doing this, we just update the state, which causes this to re-render, which is sort of why the the state is so powerful, right? Because it allows you to like avoid having to do some of these just ugly things that we had to do last time. And of course, you can condense this down to fewer lines of code if you wanted to. I'm just trying to make it clear what we're actually accomplishing by using this update to-do list. So if I now save this, and I come back to our to-do form, because we have this update to-do list, but what we actually need to do up here is we need to bind this. Inside of our to-do list, we need to say this.update to-do list is equal to this.update to-do list dot bind this. So that takes care of it. In here, we now need to pass it in as a prop to our form. So for our form, we need to first say the API URL is equal to API URL. And then we need to say update to-do list is equal to this.update to-do list. So this is passing in the function that we'll use, which allows us to access it inside of our to-do form. Whew, okay, so that takes care of submitting the data. We now need to handle what happens when we change the task. So we'll say we need to create this handle task change thing that we have up here. So we'll say handle task change, which also takes in an event. And when the task changes, we just want to say this.set state. And then we say task is equal to event.target.value. And that should be everything we need for this form to at least function. So let's come over to our application, and I'll just come to localhost port 3000 to do a hard refresh. And we'll say, like, how many do we have here? 4. So 5 is one we just made. And I'll hit add task. And here we're getting an error with, first we're getting a 500 error here. And then it's also telling us that each child in the list should have a unique key prop. So the reason why we're getting the key error is because the first one here doesn't actually have a key associated with it, because we're getting this internal server error, which is the first one. And this is actually a problem with our API. So when we originally created the API, everything worked as we would expect it to. But because we changed it to use this API /v1/todos, we actually need to come over into our API code. So let me just close the server and type code dot to open this up in an editor. And we need to come into our, where is it? There it is. Our controller. So we'll come into app, controllers, and then API v1 todos controller. And for our create action right here, when we render the JSON, we also have a location, and this is where our problem is. So what we can do is we can actually run a Rails routes inside of our terminal here, and we can take a look at what the show action should look like. So we have right here, it's the API _v1 _todo. We actually want this to-dos path. So what we can do is we can, let me just move this all around. There's a lot of stuff going on my screen right now. We can come in here and we can say, instead of location to do, we'll say API _v1 _todos _path, and we'll pass in the @todo. So if I save this, and then I come over here and I run my Rails S command, and I'm running this with Rails S-P 3001. And now if I refresh the page, this will still work. Let me actually come back to the to-dos path. So here you can see that 5 is working. So if we had refreshed, it would have worked just fine. But the problem was the redirect at the end, or the response location. But now if I say number 6 should work, this will either work or I'll be eating my own words. And it looks like that worked, so that's good. So here you can see we have the first 5 are actually not coming to us in the right order, but 6 is being added to the front. So we could either change it by saying, instead of unshifting, we could do a push right here. So if I change it like that, number 7 is last, and I hit add task. So you can see here, number 6 got put to the end once it refreshed, but number 7 should get put below it now. So we can either do that, or we could come up to our get tasks fetch API URL, and right here after the response items, we can just say set it to be response items.reverse, and this should also work. So now number 7 is last, but now it's actually first. So number 8 should be, number 8 will now be pushed to the back because we're still using push right here. So number 8, if we add it, should be added below hello world. But when we refresh the page, number 8 should be at the top because of how we're doing that in reverse for the GET request. So if we now change this back to an unshift inside of our update to-do list, and now if I post a number 9 is going to be at the top. So if I hit add task, that gets added to the top of the list of items. So I think that's going to do it for, part 2. I just wanted to get the form working a little bit. Next time we can work on, changing the styling and fixing fixing some of the uglier portions of the material that we're using here. But I thought this would be a good way to showcase like the difference between what we did last week and what we're hoping to do this week by using React. So you can see like even just some of the inserts for the HTML were different just because we're using a state now. So when we update the state, it's just as easy as, forcing it to re-render. But you'll see that sometimes you have some wasted renders where you're rendering stuff twice. And that's where you have to figure out why is stuff rendering twice. And you can actually, if you have this React extension installed, you can come into it in Chrome and you can go to View Settings, and you could say Highlight Updates when components render. So now if I refresh the page and I submit another task, you can even see right here when I click on this, every time I change it, you can see that something is rendering again. And if I hit add task, you can see everything that just had its state updated right there. So that's one way that you can go through and you can try and figure out what's causing these double renders. And just to give you a bit of a working example of this, one of the problems I had developing Pathfind out when I was first learning React was, right now I'm running into errors because this is this is not the right version of the application. But if I come over here to the components, every time I was drawing something initially, this whole grid was being updated, which is not something that you want to see, right? So you move this node and that was just causing everything to update. Right now it's causing the navbar to update, but just imagine if, this cell had to update this one, this one, this one. And the way I debugged it was I came into my components and I was like, okay, well, what's causing all of these updates? What are all the things that are actually updating? What's slowing this down? And once I saw that every single one of these cells was updating whenever I did anything, that sort of told me, okay, so when I change what the node type is, which is how I'm using this, so right here you can see I have these node types. When I changed what the node type was, so from here it's air, and I changed it to a wall, that was setting a state. So each of these cells had its own state, and that's sort of where I said, oh, okay, so maybe I shouldn't be using states for this, or I need to change how I'm handling this. So maybe I need a list of all of the states, and that's when I eventually settled on something like MobX to handle this a bit more smoothly with a store. But that's just that's sort of beside the point. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of why this is rendering twice, or why this is printing twice. And it's because inside render, we're calling console.log. So here you can see that this is happening twice whenever you do anything. So that's something that we'll have to take a look at in a future episode, is how do we reduce this from, you know, running 4 times initially to maybe only running like once when it's empty and then once when it updates. But we're not going to be covering that in this video because we're already like 36 minutes in. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and cut to the outro video. Okay, so that's going to do it for part 2 of the React API project thingy. Still don't have a name for it, even though we're on like the 2nd week of the API binge. But next time we'll probably take a look at how we delete something, and I'll have a couple extra surprises for you guys. I'm planning on covering why I created like an asterisk for the all request origins thing in the course configuration next time, and a couple other smaller details that we need to refine. Like I think someone pointed out in the comments that we need to fix where the footer is, because for some reason I thought that the footer belonged outside of the body. It doesn't. That doesn't make any sense. So we do need to move that up, and I'll sort of go through why that is with some resources so you guys can sort of understand that a little bit better. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. If this video did give you some value, then remember to like it. And if this video wasn't helpful, then remember to dislike it, because the last thing we want is more videos that don't help at the top of the search results. You know, that applies for other people's channels too. You know, if you find a video that helps you, remember to like it so that other people can see, you know, more likes on the video. And if it doesn't help, then remember to dislike it, because at least when I'm learning, that's the first thing I look at. I'll click on a video and I'll say, what's the like to dislike ratio? And if it's like 80%, I'm like, ugh, you know, maybe there's something better. And if that's the only resource and it's at 80%, I at least know, wow, this is going to be a rough ride. But yeah, if you want to see more of these, you can, consider subscribing and hitting the bell. I've got another 15 weeks of these coming. They won't all be React API videos, but it'll all be something vaguely reminiscent of a Ruby on Rails tutorial project thingy. I'm sort of winging it at this point. I just make up a new project every week, so I don't really know what's coming, but, that should be a fun surprise and at least a little bit entertaining and educational. But that's it for me. That's my elevator pitch. I will see you guys in part 3 tomorrow, hopefully. Goodbye.